Good morning, thank you for coming, thank you for asking me. I hope you don't mind if I sit down, I've got these knees, you see. That's why I didn't go on the walk yesterday. Aaron has very kindly sort of more or less given you the first part of my talk. This is jolly good from my point of view, in fact you've more or less done the whole talk. So. But the point is, you see, as far as I'm concerned, metaphysics, which is this grand word, is what underpins our worldview. As far as I can see, metaphysics is about what the universe is really like and what we are really like and how we should fit into the universe. So it underpins science and it underpins morality and it underpins our entire view of the world. And we can't get anything right unless we get the metaphysics right. That seems to be the obvious. And as Aaron said, we can't possibly get agriculture right unless we actually have the right kind of worldview, unless we look at the world the way it really is, and unless we look at ourselves as we really are. And I'm going to come on to in a minute just to describe very briefly how really, really bad present agriculture is. I mean, we're being told from on high at every minute that it's brilliant and everything's in hand and it's all being done well, it's all being done benignly, and there's going to be 9 billion of us in 30 years' time, but 40 years' time, but don't worry because the powers that be are in charge and they've got it all under control, provided we behave ourselves. This is the message that's coming from on high. And the reality is that the world is in a very, very dire state, and that the kind of stuff, the kind of policies that are coming from on high are disastrous, and in fact they're the main cause of our problems, because we needn't have these problems. We need them. And what seems to me to be underpinning the really disastrous policies is the metaphysics, the worldview that prevails among the people who now dominate the world and who now make the kind of policies that have produced present-day agriculture and everything else. But I mean, we happen to be talking about agriculture, and agriculture, of course, is of absolutely crucial importance to human beings and to all other species. It's the greatest determinant of whether other species survive as well as ourselves. And the present worldview is a disaster. And I've just written down the sort of what I think are the main components of what you might call the prevailing worldview. This isn't necessarily what most people think, but it's what, as it were, informs the policies that come down to us from on high. And I'd say, first of all, the prevailing worldview of the present government and the American government and so on, the Russian government, the people that dominate, is entirely materialist. It just says, as Lucretius did a long time ago, there is nothing in the universe except atoms and the void. Not only that, it is logical positivist, which logical positivism came on board about 100 years ago, and basically it said that any idea that you cannot pin down absolutely, where you cannot make absolutely sort of repeatable, reliable observations, and you cannot then do maths and subject it to a testable hypothesis which you test with maths, is not worth thinking about, actually literally meaningless. So the logical positivists virtually wrote off the whole of metaphysics at a stroke. And nowadays it's become fashionable to suppose, thanks to people like Dawkins, that science is the sort of natural parent of atheism. Atheism must come out of science. Science is of course materialist, because science is very good at handling things that have to do with direct observation and with maths. So it's bound to be very materialist. It doesn't have to be logical positivist. It doesn't have to say, because we could do materialism well, materialism is all there is. It doesn't have to say that, but people like Dawkins do. And they are not only materialists, they are also logical positivists, and out of that comes atheism and complete dismissal of what one might call metaphysics. So the second thing is that, given that the universe is just stuff, there is no suggestion in there that there could be any mind in the universe, or any mind behind the universe, or any purpose in the universe. There's no purpose in stuff, it's just stuff. Coupled with that, there's an idea that goes back at least to Descartes, which says that other creatures, other animals, are simply machines. They're very complicated machines, but they're just machines. And although they may look as if they're doing emotion and all that kind of stuff, they may look as if they're thinking, this is just anthropomorphism. It's, machines could look like that too. But don't be fooled by it, they're just machines. And then we have Darwinism, which tells us that nature is incredibly competitive and that we are all competitive, that life works by us competing with each other and with other creatures. And let's actually not, it's not necessarily what Darwin said, but it's what people understand what Darwin said. And behind Darwin actually lies Tennyson, who talked about nature red in tooth and claw. And this is part of the modern metaphysics, filtered through Darwin. And then, as I said, the whole thing is, no, I didn't say that, I'm about to say it. The prevailing worldview is entirely anthropocentric. In other words, it says the only creatures in the universe are that are sentient, are human beings. Only the sentient creatures are worth worrying about because the rest don't know what's happening anyway, so only human beings count. And then you put the whole of this together and you can see that the prevailing worldview says that we have a perfect right to manipulate the structure of the world exactly the way we want to do it, for our own benefit. There's no reason to do anything else, but it's only stuff, it doesn't care, and animals don't care, so we can muck about with them as well. But because, though, we are also, besides being anthropocentric, also very, very competitive, according to the modern worldview, we don't actually need to worry about other people either, because really we're in competition with them. So we have a view of the world which is entirely anthropocentric, entirely materialistic, and yet says, well, most human beings don't matter either, because it's only our own in-group that matters. And this is the prevailing worldview. And this idea that we have the right to fiddle with the universe as we like, because it's just stuff, is coupled with the idea, because we have such faith in science, that we have the ability to do this. That, our science will make us omniscient, so that we can understand perfectly how the universe works. And I've often heard scientists talking in this vein, will we soon have physics completely sewn up? Will we soon have a grand unified theory that explains absolutely everything? Is biology just, molecular biology plus Darwin plus genetics? This kind of view, total world view, absolute knowledge. And out of the conceit that we can have omniscience comes the idea of omnipotence, that anything we can control, that we can understand absolutely, we can also control absolutely. And out of this comes the idea that all we need is enough technology to be able to control the world to do anything we absolutely like. And out of this comes the idea that all you need is enough money to spend on the technology. So what you've got to do is make lots of money so you can have the technology so you can fiddle about with the world and make it do exactly what you like. And everybody, for example, this is just an example, but gave a lot of praise to Nicholas Stern in his report a few years ago when he was talking about climate change. And he said, if you spend N trillion pounds on the technology, we can control climate change. And the economists thought this was terrific because he's put a figure on the money you need to spend, and now they can think clearly about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. But that assumption that we understood climate change well enough to be able to control it, and that we have the technology that can do it, and that if only we spend enough money we will do it, is, when you think about it, ludicrous. And yet, as far as I can see, the world at large, certainly the powers that be, said, what a brilliant report, Nicholas, you've brought us all down to earth, you've shown how we can put an economic value on this thing which is about to kill us all. And you could say that out of this kind of general, what do we call it, world view, comes a modern view of what progress actually is. And I reckon, progress, you listen to people like Obama talking in Westminster the other day, and you think that progress means westernization, and that westernization means more democracy and more freedom and more prosperity and all those lovely things. If you actually look just past the surface of these, I think progress as defined or as implicit in the modern metaphysic underpins the modern worldview. There are three components, really. And the first of those is commodification. And commodification is a horrible word which I think I made up. So what it means is that you regard the world as stuff, which, it's just stuff. And because it's just stuff, you can treat it as a resource. And because it's just, and we use the word resource all the time, and because it's a resource, the job of our job is to turn the resource, which is a raw material, into a commodity, which is something you can sell. In other words, progress, which leads to prosperity, is the process of taking the fabric of the earth and our fellow creatures and turning them into money by treating them as commodities. That's component one. That's component one of modern progress. Component two is you keep this all under control. You document everything you do at every stage. In other words, component two of progress is bureaucratization. And the third component of what we in fact seem to mean by progress, or the powers that we mean by progress, is centralisation. In other words, not only do we commodify everything, but we control everything, but we make sure that only a few people are actually in control of the whole process. And the people, of course, who are actually in control of the process are the people who are best at turning resources into money, and they, of course, as it happens, are the corporates. And if you look at the present government policy of the coalition government, what are they actually saying in all fields, and especially in agriculture, is we'll hand it all over to the corporates. Let the corporates fill their boots. Let Tesco fill their boots. Let Monsanto fill their boots. And somehow or other, everything will work out okay. There are, of course, huge gaps between what the corporates can do, because that's the corporates can only do what makes lots of money. So there are gaps. I mean, the bits that you might call civilization are in the gaps. But never mind, we've got this thing called, the big society, where we, without any help from anybody else, are going to fill in the gaps between the corporates. That is basically the modern worldview as applied. And naturally coming out of this is this horrible thing called neoliberal economics, which is the global market, maximally competitive, the whole aim of which is to make them more money than anybody else, more quickly than anybody else. And when you hear secretaries of state in Britain, we heard it from Hilary Benn, who was supposed to be a socialist, for goodness sake, we certainly hear it from Caroline Spellman. They talk about things like this food security is this new word they've invented, but no, two words in fact. But they always say, well, first of all, we've got to probably produce more food of our own, but then they say, but we've got to be competitive. In other words, we've got to produce more food of our own, but only if we can do it more cheaply than the Brazilians. The Brazilians are also being told they've got to produce more stuff to turn into commodities to sell to us, but only if they can do it more cheaply than us. So basically the Brazilians and everybody else in the so-called third world, they use their sunshine, which is nice and cheap, and their space, which is nice and cheap, which they increase by cutting down forest, and their labour, which is very, very nice and cheap, and we use high technology, which basically depends on oil, to compete with them. I mean, what an incredible nonsense. Out of this comes the most incredible injustice. People, which is manifest, for example, in the suicides among farmers, among other things. 200,000 suicides in Indian farmers in the last 12 years alone. That's in India alone. And it also happens in Britain, it also happens in New Zealand, it happens in America, it happens in rich countries as well as...
What, suicides?
Suicides.
In Britain?
Oh yeah, lots. Among farmers, yes. And the 200,000 in India, incidentally, doesn't include women, because women in the bureaucratic system are classified as farmers' wives, even though they actually do most of the farming. So when they commit suicide, they go in a different column, and it makes the whole thing look much better. And that is the injustice to people and the cruelty to animals. I mean, I'm sure you've discussed this, but you know, factory farming and all that kind of stuff is just ridiculous. At the same time, this system that comes out of this neoliberal view of the economy is selling us horribly short, so that, you know, we have a population of 7 billion, and 1 billion of those 7 billion are now estimated to be chronically undernourished. Another 1 billion of those lot are said to be chronically overnourished, so that diabetes, for example, is now, well, epidemic. Everybody agrees it's just epidemic. And 1 billion live in urban slums. And, knock-on effect, our fellow creatures, about 50% of all our fellow species, that's about 4 million species out of 8 million, are now considered to be in realistic danger of extinction, probably within the next 100 years. That's half. That's the fastest mass extinction ever. And yet, I suggest, if we only farmed properly, and that actually is the theme of the book, which you'll find on sale in the lobby, called Good Food for Everyone Forever, if only we did things properly, we could actually feed ourselves easily, we could provide enough good food for everybody forever, and we could do it without wrecking the rest of the world. But we don't.